The story follows a lone adventurer who defied a forbidden law. According to an ancient nobleman's diary, consuming monsters was considered a grave taboo in this world. For a human to ingest a monster meant absorbing its dark essence. The first symptom of this curse was a surge of indescribable euphoria, coupled with an immediate enhancement of physical strength. The second stage brought unbearable headaches, intense nausea, and a state of overwhelming intoxication. But the final, and perhaps deadliest, symptom was instant death upon consuming the monster's essence, or, worse yet, the transformation of the person into a monster themselves. In the dimly lit chamber deep within the labyrinth, a man sat atop the lifeless body of a monster, his hand crushed and mangled. He was relentlessly devouring the creature's flesh. As he finished the last bite, his wounds began to miraculously heal. In that instant, he gained 2 new skills, Roar and Battle Axe. Overcome with fury, he unleashed a deafening roar, his voice resonating through the darkness. The sound echoed throughout the labyrinth, alerting every nearby monster to his presence. Upon hearing the man's roar, the nearby monsters charged toward him, intent on killing him. As they lunged at him, the man swiftly drew his axe and began his bloody rampage, slaughtering every creature that rushed his way. No matter how fiercely the monsters attacked, he dispatched them instantly with powerful swings of his weapon. With each kill, he devoured their remains, absorbing their essence into his body. As he consumed more, he gained new skills, further enhancing his strength and fueling his relentless massacre. As the man continued his relentless slaughter, he gained a multitude of new skills, including agility boost, lightning cloak, poison mist, and thread manipulation, among others. He skillfully employed each ability to aid him in his fight against the seemingly endless monsters. Despite his immense power and the numerous skills at his disposal, the sheer number of monsters began to wear him down, and fatigue started to set in. Confident he had slain enough to escape the labyrinth, he paused for a moment, only to realize that countless more monsters still surrounded him, closing in from all sides. As the man stood surrounded by the approaching monsters, he made a firm resolve. In that moment, he vowed to himself that he would kill every last one of them, escape the labyrinth alive, and return home safely, no matter the cost. In the frontier city of Bologna, a territory dotted with numerous labyrinths, one stood out among the rest, the Miasma Labyrinth. The very air inside it relentlessly sapped the strength of any adventurer who dared to enter. Most avoided the place, despising the constant drain on their abilities, except for one man, Rude. Rude frequently ventured into the labyrinth, unbothered by its dangers. Over time, the other adventurers began to call him the miasma scavenger, for his fearless persistence in exploring its depths. As Rude stepped into the miasma labyrinth, a sense of satisfaction washed over him. He had made it to the 6th floor, and as he surveyed the ground, he was pleased to find an abundance of miasma grass growing there. This rare herb, known for its ability to purify miasma, was an invaluable source of income for him. However, Rude reminded himself not to be greedy. He resolved to harvest only what he needed, taking just the right amount to ensure the labyrinth could replenish its supply. As Rude surveyed the miasma grass, he smiled, knowing that the harvest from the 6th floor would sustain him for about 3 days. As he continued through the labyrinth, he encountered miasma rats scurrying about. Many of the monsters in the miasma labyrinth wielded miasma and poison, which contributed to the adventurer's aversion to the place. However, these miasma and poison attacks were ineffective against Rude, who was impervious to their effects. Rude rushed toward the miasma rats, determined to eliminate them. However, as he fought, he began to struggle against the overwhelming number of rats swarming the area. Just as he was grappling with the situation, an unknown adventurer arrived and cast a fireball to help him. Unfortunately, the spell missed its target, allowing the rat to escape. Stunned and confused, Rude sat on the ground, trying to make sense of the unexpected intervention. Rude turned to the direction from which the fireball had come and saw 3 adventurers standing there. Recognizing their faces from the Adventurers Guild, he felt a surge of annoyance at their presence. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers turned to the one who had cast the fireball and suggested that he should have aimed closer to ensure the spell hit its target. At that moment, one of the 3 adventurers extended a hand to help Rude up and apologized for the mishap. He introduced himself and asked Rude's name. Noting that Rude appeared to be struggling against the miasma rats, the adventurer explained that he and his companions had only intended to assist him in the fight. Rude, brushing off the adventurer's offer of help, got up on his own. He thanked the adventurer for his concern but requested that he be given a warning before any actions that might endanger him. Annoyed, the adventurer snapped that the reason he had shouted, "Fireball," was precisely to alert Rude before casting the spell. As they were talking, one of the three adventurers opened a door and informed the other two that the room beyond was filled with miasma grass. The other two adventurers were thrilled and excited by the news, but Rude was displeased by what he had just heard. Rude then asked why they had been secretly following him through the labyrinth and suggested they might be after his harvesting spot. One of the adventurers, looking irritated, explained that they were simply adventurers trying to make a living in the labyrinth and had coincidentally crossed paths with Rude. He added that they had merely come to his aid while saving him from the miasma rats and that Rude should be grateful for their assistance. The three adventurers glared at Rude with expressions of disgust and menace, fully aware that he was powerless to retaliate even if he was in the right. After some careful thought, Rude approached them, apologized for accusing them of following him, and thanked them for their help against the miasma rats. He understood that, despite his grievance, he had no means to confront them and thus decided to go along with the situation. Back in Bologna, at a restaurant called Full Belly, Rude was thrown to the floor by two men. One of them scolded Rude, saying that his presence in the restaurant ruined the taste of the food with his unpleasant smell. The man told Rude that he was banned from entering the establishment because Rude clearly couldn't understand how disruptive his smell was to other customers. At that moment, one of the men looked at Rude and said that a true adventurer was someone who could defeat monsters. He sneered, telling Rude that with his worthless skill, abnormal status nullification, he would never be able to become a real adventurer, no matter how hard he tried. The two men laughed loudly as they taunted Rude, who could only stand there in silence, unable to respond. Abnormal status nullification was Rude's unique ability. While it was useful for exploring the miasma labyrinth, it had a significant drawback. It did not provide Rude with the combat skills needed to defeat monsters, which are essential for any adventurer. As a result, Rude, lacking any offensive skills, was not welcomed in any adventuring party. His inability to contribute in battles and his reliance on scavenging the labyrinth's lower levels led to his being labeled as the miasma scavenger. This title reflected both his skills' limitations and his role in searching for items in the labyrinth's depths. Ultimately, Rude's ineffective skill caused him to be seen as an outcast rather than a true adventurer. At that moment, Rude reflected on his situation, feeling frustrated that, as a grown man, he still had to fight life or death battles against mere rats. He returned to his inn and lay down on his bed, troubled by the thought that he might continue to live his life as the miasma scavenger. Rude was disheartened by the realization that no one saw him as a true adventurer or respected him. Instead, he was always treated poorly. The next day, Rude arrived at the Adventurers Guild. As he entered, he thought about finding a new patch of miasma grass in a different location, as he still had some money left from the miasma grass he had sold the previous day. Noticing the unusually loud commotion in the guild, Rude wondered what was causing all the noise. Rude approached one of the staff members at the Adventurers Guild and asked if she had any good job requests or tasks to recommend. Upon recognizing him, the woman addressed him as the miasma scavenger and informed him that a new labyrinth had been discovered. Rude was stunned by the news. A newly discovered labyrinth meant it would be filled with untapped treasures and magical items. It was a golden opportunity for any adventurer, and Rude was thrilled at the prospect. He saw it as a chance to change his life and escape his current status. Rude then realized why the guild was so noisy. Everyone was excited about the newly discovered labyrinth. As he surveyed the bustling room, the woman interrupted him, noting that the price of the miasma herb, which Rude typically brought in, would begin to drop immediately. Rude was initially puzzled but soon became worried upon hearing the woman's comment. He asked her why the price of the miasma herb would decrease. The woman explained that the miasma labyrinth had never been particularly popular, and with adventurers now flocking to the newly discovered labyrinth, there would be little demand for the miasma herb. Consequently, prices for the herb were expected to drop. As Rude contemplated his options, the woman added that the new labyrinth was located in the Avellio Mountains and that he would not be allowed to enter. Shocked by this news, Rude asked why he was barred from exploring the new labyrinth. The woman showed him a poster that outlined the entry requirements. Adventurers needed to be D rank or higher to gain access. Since Rude was only an E rank adventurer, he did not meet the qualifications to enter the new labyrinth. Looking worried, Rude told the woman that he was determined to explore the new labyrinth. He asked if there was any way he could qualify to enter. The woman sighed and explained that the rules were strict, and he needed to meet the requirements to gain entry. She added that even if Rude somehow managed to get in, he would likely perish in vain due to his lack of strength and the absence of a party to support him. Without the necessary combat skills and allies, he would be left to face the labyrinth's dangers alone. Rude couldn't dispute the woman's words. She spoke the truth about his situation. At that moment, an adventurer named Bear approached from behind and suggested that if Rude was so determined to explore the new labyrinth, he should join Bear's team as a porter. Bear smiled at Rude, while Rude looked back at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. After a short while, Rude found himself in a carriage with Bear's team, en route to the newly discovered labyrinth. Breaking the silence, Bear turned to Rude and expressed his pleasure at having met him. He explained that he had been looking for someone to help carry materials from the new labyrinth but had struggled to find anyone. Bear was relieved and happy to have found Rude for the task. Rude, meanwhile, reflected that Bear's difficulty in finding a porter might be due to all the adventurers flocking to the new labyrinth, making it hard to secure one. As Rude pondered this, one of Bear's companions, a red-haired woman named Sasha, voiced her concern. She asked Bear why they were bringing a miasma-scavenger, like Rude, and suggested they should have chosen a different porter. Another companion, a heavily built man named Rick, agreed, questioning Bear's decision and implying they should have found someone more qualified than Rude. Bear then addressed his two companions, telling them not to speak badly about Rude. He explained that, given Rude's experience as an adventurer, it was preferable to have him accompany them rather than a less experienced newcomer. Shifting the topic, Bear turned to Rude and apologized for not properly introducing himself earlier. He introduced himself as Bear, the leader of the Scarlet Sword group, and also introduced Rude to his companions, Sasha, the red-haired woman, and Rick, the large-built man. Bear then informed Rude that the three of them were D-rank adventurers. In response, Rude introduced himself, stating that he was an E-rank adventurer. Bear expressed a desire to learn more about Rude's status before they entered the new labyrinth and asked if Rude would be willing to show him his guild card. Rude complied, taking out his guild card and presenting it to Bear. On Rude's guild card, it was noted that he was a level 7 E-rank adventurer with 4 types of skills. Bear, examining the card, inquired if Rude could use fire magic, as one of his skills was indeed fire magic. Rude explained that his fire magic was too weak to be effective in combat but mentioned that it proved useful in dark places and for cooking food. Bear, smiling, reassured Rude that despite its limited power, the skill still had its uses. A few moments later, the 4 of them arrived at the new labyrinth. Bear, Rick, and Sasha were buzzing with excitement as they stood before the entrance. Bear announced that they had reached the newly discovered Avalio labyrinth. Sasha, brimming with enthusiasm, remarked that it seemed they might be among the first to arrive. However, Rick quickly urged everyone not to waste any time and to start exploring the labyrinth immediately. As they opened the door, they were surprised to find that the labyrinth was already teeming with adventurers. Hundreds of adventurers were already inside, busy collecting loot and making the labyrinth feel crowded. Sasha, seeing the crowds, was disappointed and frustrated. She had expected to be among the first to enter the labyrinth, but it was clear they were not. Bear, noting the situation, informed his team that it appeared most of the first layer of the labyrinth had already been thoroughly explored. He warned that if they stayed in the first layer, they would likely find little to no loot. Rick reassured Sasha, telling her not to be disheartened and suggesting they should head to the deeper levels that hadn't yet been explored by other adventurers. Sasha agreed, excited at the prospect of exploring uncharted areas. Just then, Rude interrupted, pointing out that since this was a newly discovered labyrinth, it would be wiser to map out the first layer thoroughly before venturing into the deeper levels. As Rude made his suggestion, Sasha and Rick rudely interrupted him, dismissing his input and stating that they had no intention of taking advice from a porter. They added that Rude was not in a position to offer opinions. Rick further commented that this was why Rude remained an E-rank adventurer. At that moment, Bear stepped in, telling Sasha and Rick to stop criticizing Rude. He reminded them that Rude meant no harm with his suggestion and that they should consider his input. Although Bear intervened to stop Sasha and Rick's criticism, he did agree with their perspective. He told Rude that if they continued to focus on the first layer, they wouldn't achieve significant results. Bear explained that to find truly valuable and unique treasures, they needed to delve into the deeper levels of the labyrinth. After a while, the four of them reached the fourth level of the labyrinth. As they fought monsters, Rude struggled to defend himself, while the other three found it relatively easy to handle the creatures on this level. Rick, smiling, told Rude not to be intimidated by the smaller monsters. As Rude watched them, he thought to himself that Bear, Rick, and Sasha were far stronger than he was, easily handling the monsters he was struggling to fight. Rude felt overwhelmed and nervous, unable to move his hands or face the monsters effectively. He was unable to contribute to the battle or assist the others in any way. After a while, the three had successfully defeated all the monsters in the area. Sasha remarked that it was a good decision to venture to the deeper levels and added that it was a relief to find no other adventurers in their current level. Bear agreed, noting that while the monsters were not very strong, they had also discovered some treasures on the fourth level of the labyrinth. At that moment, Rick shouted at Rude, demanding that he collect the materials from the monsters Rick had defeated as well. Rude replied that he couldn't collect the materials because they were too damaged, with the monster stones shattered. Rick, visibly annoyed, insisted that Rude should still check the materials, as there might be some that were intact. Rick also reminded Rude not to slack off, emphasizing that as their porter, and being only an E-rank adventurer and a miasma scavenger, it was his responsibility to perform his duties. Although Rude was reluctant to listen to Rick, he couldn't go against him after witnessing Rick's strength in combat. Hesitantly, Rude acknowledged Rick's command and agreed to collect the materials from the monsters Rick had killed. As Rude approached one of the monsters, he saw that the creatures Rick had killed were mangled, their guts and blood creating a terrible stench. Rude wondered why Rick had been so brutal in his method of killing. At that moment, he activated his fire magic, thinking it would be easier to retrieve the materials if he burned some of the monsters' bodies to make the collection process less unpleasant. Seeing Rude burning the monsters, Rick commented to the other two that Rude might be doing so to eat the monster meat. He added that, having been on the exploration for a while, he was starting to feel hungry and found the idea of monster meat somewhat appealing. Sasha, however, urged Rick to stop mentioning it, as the thought of eating monster meat grossed her out. Sasha reminded Rick that it was considered taboo for adventurers to eat monster meat because the monster's magic could be absorbed into their bodies, with unpredictable effects. Rick, smiling, reassured Sasha that he was only joking. He added that once they returned, he planned to use the money he had earned to enjoy as much delicious food as he wanted. But as Rick was saying that, the group suddenly became tense when they heard a powerful roar echoing through the labyrinth. Turning to face the source of the sound, they were stunned to see a towering minotaur standing before them. This B-rank monster was an alarming sight, as minotaurs were typically found in much deeper levels of the labyrinth, not the shallow fourth layer they were currently exploring. The group was thrown into disarray, realizing that they were severely outmatched. Each member knew that defeating a B-rank monster was far beyond their capabilities, given their lower levels and current state. They needed to quickly come up with a plan or find a way to escape, as the odds of facing the Minotaur head-on were overwhelmingly against them. At that moment, Bear shouted at Rude, demanding that he hand over his backpack so Bear could use its contents to deal with the Minotaur. Rude quickly complied, passing the backpack to Bear. He then asked Bear what their plan was to handle the situation and if Bear had any strategy in mind. However, as Bear received the backpack, he smiled menacingly. Without warning, he swung his sword and slashed Rude's back, causing Rude to fall to the ground, in pain and bleeding heavily. Bear's sinister grin revealed that his plan was far from what Rude had anticipated. Bear, after slashing Rude, called out to Rick and Sasha. Rick immediately responded by throwing an axe-like object and activating its spell, Warrior's Encouragement. This spell redirected the Minotaur's focus, making Rude, who was writhing on the ground in pain, the target of the monster's attacks. Meanwhile, Sasha activated her spell haste on herself, Rick, and Bear, boosting their running speed so they could escape from the Minotaur. Lying on the floor in agony, Rude asked the three if they had planned to abandon him from the very beginning. Bear, with a menacing smile, confirmed that Rude had been brought along solely as bait and that they had always intended to leave him behind. Rude was stunned by the revelation. As Bear, Rick, and Sasha fled, they told Rude to buy them some time while they escaped. Overwhelmed with rage, Rude screamed and cursed them for using him as bait and leaving him to die while they ran to safety. At that moment, the Minotaur's attention locked onto Rude due to the spell. Panic surged through Rude as he struggled to figure out his next move. The Minotaur unleashed a devastating blow to the ground, propelling Rude into the air. Though Rude managed to narrowly evade the attack, a pained smile crossed his face. Despite his successful dodge, he knew deep down that escaping the Minotaur was futile. The odds were stacked against him, and he braced himself for the inevitable. At that moment, the Minotaur launched itself with immense force toward Rude, crashing through the wall and sending them both into a new room. The impact was so powerful that the wall shattered, and they found themselves in an entirely different chamber. However, the room had a large hole in the floor, and both Rude and the Minotaur plunged into it. Moments later, Rude lay on the ground, racked with pain, slowly regaining consciousness. As he opened his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if he was still alive. At that moment, Rude glanced to the side and saw that he was lying on top of the Minotaur's body. He realized that they had fallen through the hole together, and the Minotaur's body had cushioned his landing, saving him from a more severe impact. However, Rude's relief was short-lived as he grimly acknowledged that, even if the Minotaur had died, it was only a matter of time before he would meet the same fate. Rude thought to himself that even if no other monsters appeared, he would still face death from blood loss or starvation. Lying atop the Minotaur's body, he felt an intense hunger and longed for something to eat. As he considered the possibility of consuming the monster, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. Eating a monster could only lead to disaster. Despite this, Rude couldn't shake the memory of a man from his childhood who had once told him never to give up, no matter how tough or painful life became. Motivated by that memory, Rude resolved to survive against the odds and began to eat the Minotaur's body. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.